The scent of true peace, I've discovered, is the smell of nothing at all. It's the sterile, processed air of a state-of-the-art clean room, the quiet hum of a laminar flow hood, the absence of contaminants, both microbial and human. For 30 years, my world was one of high stakes, high-pressure science. As a senior researcher for a quiet, lavishly funded offshoot of the Department of Defense, I lived a life dictated by project deadlines, security clearances, and the relentless pursuit of materials that could redefine the future. I designed polymers that could think, ceramics that could heal, and alloys that could bend light. It was a life of profound purpose, but it was also a life lived in a gilded cage, a world of secure compounds and non-disclosure agreements. When my last great project, my life's work, reached its final, delicate phase, I was given an unprecedented option, a quiet, off-site retirement to see it through to completion, far from the bureaucracy and oversight of a formal government lab. All I wanted was a sanctuary, a place where Dr. Elias Thorne, the material scientist, could simply become Elias, the quiet man at the end of the cul-de-sac. I found it in a community called Maple Creek Preserve, a name that promised a tranquil, arboreal existence. The reality was a pristine, meticulously planned suburb where every lawn was a perfect emerald rectangle, and every tree seemed to have been placed by a landscape architect with an obsessive-compulsive disorder. It was a world of profound, enforced order, and for my purposes, it was perfect. I bought a handsome brick house at the very end of a quiet street, its primary selling point being a large, deep basement with solid concrete walls. Before I even moved in my furniture, a team of government contractors, disguised as a high-end home renovation crew, spent a month transforming that basement. They soundproofed it, installed a dedicated, isolated HVAC system with a multi-stage HEPA and carbon filtration unit that vented discreetly at the side of the house, and ran a dedicated shielded fiber optic line from the main road. The result was a civilian-grade biocontainment lab, a clean room where I could complete my work in absolute secrecy and peace. My new life began with a blissful, monastic routine. Days were spent in the lab, tending to the glowing green bioreactors where my bioalgae cultures synthesized the polymers for Project Chimera. Evenings were spent in the quiet garden, enjoying the simple, uncomplicated beauty of a blooming rose. For 3 months, it was perfect. And then I met Judith Albright. She appeared at my doorstep one afternoon, not with a welcome basket, but with a small, handheld electronic device. She was pointing at my house like a weapon. She was a woman in her late 50s, with a severe, angular haircut, and an expression of perpetual, simmering suspicion. She wore a crisp, white polo shirt and khaki pants, a uniform of suburban authority. "Are you the owner of this property?" she asked, her voice sharp and accusatory. "I am," I said, offering a polite, neighborly smile. "Elias Thorne. I moved in a few months ago." "I know when you moved in," she snapped, her eyes narrowing. She held up the device. "I am Judith Albright, president of the Maple Creek Preserve Homeowners Association and head of the Community Safety and Environmental Committee. This," she said, shaking the device, "is a professional-grade air quality monitor, and for the past several weeks, it has been detecting anomalies." "Anomalies?" I asked, my calm demeanor a carefully constructed facade over a sudden jolt of professional alarm. "A smell," she said, her nostrils flaring as if she could sense it now. "A sterile, chemical smell. It emanates from the side of your house, from that new vent you had installed. It's not a normal household smell. Mr. Thorne, it's unnatural." I had anticipated this contingency. The exhaust from my lab's air filtration system was, by design, cleaner and more sterile than the surrounding air. To a sensitive nose, the absence of normal smells, pollen, dust, lawn clippings might itself smell strange, sterile, almost medicinal. Ah, that, I said with a rehearsed, casual chuckle. That's the ventilation for my workshop in the basement. I'm a hobbyist. I build ship models, work with resins and lacquers. It's a rather high-end air purification system to ensure no fumes get into the rest of the house. The air coming out of that vent is probably the cleanest in the entire state. Her eyes swept over me, a look of profound disbelief on her face. She did not believe me. Not for a second. The bylaws of this community, Mr. Thorne, specifically bylaw 15 Section G, strictly prohibit the emission of any noxious or unidentified odors from a private residence. I am officially notifying you that you are in violation. You have 48 hours to dismantle your workshop and cease these emissions. Mrs. Albright, I began, trying to reason with her. I can assure you, the system is perfectly safe. There are no emissions. It's simply clean air. It is an unnatural smell, she repeated, her voice hardening with the unshakable conviction of the truly ignorant. And in my experience, the unnatural is always dangerous. 48 hours, Mr. Thorne. She turned and marched away, leaving me standing in my doorway. I looked from her retreating, rigid, back to the quiet, unassuming vent on the side of my house. The vent was the only physical link between my secret, high-stakes world and the placid, orderly world of Maple Creek Preserve. And Judith Albright had just declared it a threat. I had come here seeking sanctuary, but I realized with a cold, sinking feeling that I had inadvertently built my laboratory on the front lines of a war I had no idea was being fought. The first official salvo of Judith's war against my lab arrived precisely 48 hours later. It was a stiff, linen-textured envelope, slipped under my door with a quiet, accusatory finality. Inside, on heavy paper, watermarked with the HOA's maple leaf logo, was citation Yashe 881B, violation of bylaw 15G, emission of noxious or unidentified odors. A fine of $150 was assessed, with a stern warning that the fine would double for every week the violation was not rectified. My entire career had been built on a foundation of data, logic, and methodical problem-solving. When faced with an irrational assertion, the only proper response was to counter it with irrefutable, empirical evidence. Judith Albright's claim was based on her subjective, paranoid sense of smell. My defense, therefore, would be based on the objective, dispassionate analysis of a gas chromatograph. I spent the next morning not in my lab, but on the phone with several independent environmental testing firms. I found one with a sterling reputation and federal certifications, and I hired them to conduct a full-spectrum air quality analysis. I didn't tell them what they were looking for. I simply told them I wanted a baseline reading of the ambient air in my neighborhood and a specific analysis of the air being expelled by my basement ventilation unit. 2 days later, a technician in a quiet, unmarked van spent 3 hours on my property. He used a series of sophisticated-looking probes and collection devices, taking samples from my front yard, my backyard, the street, and, most importantly, directly from the exhaust vent itself. He was professional, discreet, and, thankfully, incurious. The certified report arrived in my inbox a week later. It was a dense, 20-page document filled with charts, graphs, and chemical breakdowns. Its conclusion was clear, concise, and devastating to Judith's entire premise. The ambient air in Maple Creek Preserve contained standard levels of pollen, dust, vehicle exhaust particulates, and fertilizer nitrates. The air being expelled from my vent, by contrast, was almost perfectly pure. It contained none of those contaminants. It was, as the report stated, of a quality typically found only in a laboratory or hospital cleanroom environment. The report officially concluded that my vent was not a source of pollution. It was, in a very real sense, an air purifier. Armed with this undeniable scientific proof, I requested a spot on the agenda for the next monthly HOA meeting. I felt a sense of detached confidence. I was a scientist, about to present my findings to a board of what I assumed were reasonable people. Surely, they would be swayed by the data. The meeting was held in a sterile community clubhouse that smelled faintly of lemon-scented disinfectant. Judith sat at the head of a long table, flanked by two other board members who watched her with a kind of rapt, fearful devotion. When my turn came, I calmly and respectfully presented my case. I did not attack Judith or question her motives. I simply presented the facts. I distributed copies of the environmental report. So, as you can see from the independent analysis, I concluded, the ventilation system for my workshop is not emitting any noxious or harmful substances. In fact, the air it expels is significantly cleaner than the surrounding air. Therefore, the system is not in violation of Bylaw 15G, and I respectfully request that the board dismiss this citation and the associated fine. Judith listened to my entire, fact-based presentation with an expression of profound boredom. She picked up the detailed, data-rich report, held it between her thumb and forefinger as if it were a soiled tissue, and placed it to the side without opening it. "Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "And for this document from your experts." She let the silence in the room stretch for a long, uncomfortable moment. "However, you seem to be operating under a misconception. Our bylaws are not concerned with what some laboratory report says. They are concerned with the lived experience of our residents. They are designed to protect our community from anything that is abnormal, unnatural, or disruptive to our peaceful way of life." She leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "I don't need a chart to tell me what I can smell with my own nose. The odor from your vent is a sterile, chemical odor. It is not the smell of fresh-cut grass or blooming flowers. It is the smell of something unnatural. And the unnatural," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "is always a precursor to danger. The violation stands. The fine stands. And it will continue to stand until you cease this activity." I stood there, momentarily stunned by the sheer, unadulterated audacity of her position. She had just, in a public forum, declared that objective, scientific fact was irrelevant when compared to her own paranoid intuition. As I walked back to my seat, the other residents studiously avoiding my eyes, I felt a familiar part of my brain, the part that analyzed threat matrices and calculated risk, begin to whir to life. The problem was no longer a simple fine. The problem was Judith Albright, a closed, irrational system that was actively hostile to data. And I knew from long, hard experience that such systems could not be reasoned with. They had to be contained. Later that evening, while searching for a file in my study, my hand brushed against a small, locked case. Inside was my old life, my doctoral credentials, a few heavily redacted scientific awards, and my last active security clearance badge from the Los Alamos National Laboratory. I picked up the laminated card. It had my picture, my name, and a string of alphanumeric codes that had once given me access to some of the most secret and powerful scientific facilities on the planet. I thought about the exhaustive, year-long background check I had undergone to receive this badge, the interviews with my friends, my family, my third-grade teacher. It was easier, I realized with a grim sense of irony, to be vetted for a top-secret government security clearance than it was to reason with Judith Albright. The official citations continued to arrive like clockwork, each one a stark white reminder of Judith's escalating obsession. I continued to formally dispute each fine, sending back a registered letter with another copy of the environmental report attached. I was methodically building a legal case, documenting a clear pattern of harassment. This calm, procedural defiance seemed to fuel her rage far more than any emotional outburst could have. If I wouldn't bend to her authority, she would find a way to break me. Her campaign escalated from bureaucratic threats to a direct, physical assault on the integrity of my laboratory. The attack was subtle, malicious, and potentially catastrophic. I discovered it not through a sound or a sight, but through an alarm. I was in my lab, in the final stages of decanting a new generation of bioalgae from its growth medium into a new bioreactor, a delicate process that required a perfectly sterile environment. Suddenly, a shrill, insistent alarm blared from my main environmental control panel. A red light flashed above a digital readout. Warning, positive pressure, failure, external containment breach detected. My blood ran cold. The positive air pressure system was the lab's most critical defense, constantly pushing air outwards to ensure that no contaminants, dust, microbes, pollen from the outside world could get in. A failure meant the sterile field was compromised. My entire multi-billion-dollar project, my life's work, was suddenly vulnerable. I immediately initiated the emergency lockdown protocol. Heavy steel shutters slammed down over the small observation windows. A secondary internal air circulation system kicked in, attempting to scrub the existing air. I moved to the diagnostic monitor, my heart hammering against my ribs. The system was reporting a complete blockage of the primary exterior air intake vent. I raced upstairs and out the side door. The cause of the blockage was immediately apparent. Someone had jammed a thick, greasy rag deep into the slatted opening of the intake vent. The rag was soaked in some kind of caustic, chemical-smelling fluid bleach, or perhaps ammonia. It was a deliberately corrosive act, designed not just to block the airflow, but to potentially damage the delicate, multi-layered filtration matrix inside. A cold, precise fury settled over me. This was Judith's work. It was deniable, of course. A piece of trash blown in by the wind, a prank by local teenagers. But I knew the specific, targeted nature of the attack, not the exhaust vent she complained about. But the more critical, less obvious intake vent was a sign of a new, more malevolent level of planning. There was no time to dwell on her motives. The sterile integrity of Project Chimera was at stake. I spent the next 4 hours engaged in a frantic, high-stakes repair and decontamination protocol. First, I had to carefully extract the chemical-soaked rag without allowing any of it to crumble and fall deeper into the system. Then, I had to completely disassemble the exterior housing of the HVAC unit to access the primary filter bank. The first-stage carbon filter was saturated with the corrosive chemical and had to be discarded. The real work was inside the lab. I had to don a full biocontainment suit, complete with a self-contained breathing apparatus. For 2 hours, I worked in the cloying, humid environment of the suit, systematically sterilizing every surface in the lab with a vaporized hydrogen peroxide system. My internal monologue was a frantic checklist of technical procedures. Maintain laminar flow across the primary work surfaces. Particle count is already spiking in Zone 4. Must purge the entire atmospheric volume 3 times before re-establishing positive pressure. If any of the new culture batches are compromised, the project is set back by 6 months. By late afternoon, the crisis was averted. The new filter was installed, the system was recalibrated, and the lab was once again a sealed, sterile environment. The final air particle scan showed the contaminant count was back down to acceptable levels. The project was safe, but it had been a near disaster. That evening, I had to make a report. I sat down at my encrypted computer terminal and initiated a secure video call. The face that appeared on the screen was stern, weathered, and framed by the 4 silver stars on the collar of his uniform. "Elias," General Harding said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "You don't usually call on a secure line unless there's a problem." "We had a minor containment breach, General," I said, my voice tired but steady. The general's eyes sharpened. "Compromise of the project." "No, nothing's compromised. The protocol's held, but the primary air intake scrubber was deliberately tampered with. It was an external, unsophisticated physical attack." Harding was silent for a moment, his jaw tight. "The local variable we discussed," he asked, using our agreed-upon euphemism for the HOA. "The local variable is becoming more aggressive," I confirmed. "I've handled the immediate situation, but her behavior is escalating from harassment to direct sabotage. It is becoming a tangible threat to the security of the project." "I see," the general said. He stared at me, his expression unreadable. "The primary objective is the successful completion of Chimera. All other considerations are secondary. If this local variable continues to interfere, my response will not be subtle. Do you understand, Elias?" "I understand, General," I said. "I still believe I can manage the situation discreetly." "For now," he replied. "But my patience, unlike your scientific curiosity, is a finite resource. Keep me apprised." The screen went dark. I sat there in the quiet of my study, the weight of the general's words settling on me. Judith Albright thought she was fighting a quiet, reclusive hobbyist. She had no idea she was provoking the institutional wrath of the United States Department of Defense. Having failed to intimidate me with bylaws or cripple my lab with sabotage, Judith shifted her campaign to the modern era's most effective arena for character assassination, the Internet. Her weapon of choice was the Maple Creek Preserve Neighbors online forum, a seemingly benign platform that, in her hands, became an echo chamber for her paranoid fantasies. The post appeared on a Monday morning, a carefully crafted piece of fear-mongering designed to turn the entire community against me. It did not mention me by name, but it didn't have to. Everyone knew who the new resident on Oak Lane was. "A public safety alert for all residents." The headline screamed in bold, red letters. Many of you have noticed the strange, persistent chemical smells emanating from the property at the end of Oak Lane. I want to assure you that your HOA board has been working tirelessly to address this issue. However, the resident in question refuses to be transparent about the nature of the activities he is conducting in his basement. From there, it descended into pure, unadulterated speculation, framed as concerned questioning. What is he hiding in that sealed basement? What kind of dangerous, unregulated chemicals is he using that require such an industrial-strength ventilation system? We have a right to know what potential toxins are being pumped into the air. Our children breathe. I urge you all to be vigilant. Report any unusual smells, any strange deliveries, any suspicious activity to the board immediately. Our children's safety must be our #1 priority. The comment section exploded. Her cronies and the neighborhood's most anxious residents immediately began to feed the hysteria. "Thank you for your courage in speaking out, Judith. I knew something wasn't right over there. My son has had a cough for weeks. I'll bet it's from those fumes. He's probably running a meth lab. I've seen shows on TV. This is exactly how they hide it." It was a digital witch hunt, a cascade of baseless accusations built on a foundation of her original lie. I considered logging on to post a rebuttal, to share the environmental report, to plead for reason. But I knew it was pointless. She was the group's administrator. Any dissenting opinion would be immediately deleted, and I would be blocked. She had created a perfect feedback loop of fear, and I was cast as the shadowy villain. The effects of her online campaign were immediate and chilling. Neighbors who had once offered a polite wave now crossed the street to avoid me. The friendly wave from the mail carrier was replaced by a quick, furtive drop of the mail in the box and a hasty retreat. I was being systematically isolated, turned into the neighborhood boogeyman. The culmination of this shunning occurred at the annual community potluck. I decided to attend, foolishly believing that a calm, normal, face-to-face presence might dispel some of the online hysteria. It was a strategic disaster. The moment I stepped onto the community green, a palpable chill went through the crowd. Conversations faltered. A group of mothers instinctively pulled their children closer. I was a social leper. I stood by the dessert table, a plate of brownies I had baked growing stale in my hands. As Judith held court nearby, she wasn't gloating. She was performing. She spoke in low, concerned tones to a rapt audience, her expression one of pained, worried responsibility. She was the brave protector, the lone voice crying out to save the community from the mysterious threat in their midst. Only one person had the courage to speak to me. It was a man named David, a pediatrician who lived a few houses down. He approached me, his expression a mixture of professional curiosity and human decency. "Dr. Thorne," he said, keeping his voice low. "I'm a doctor. I've read the online chatter. People are genuinely scared. For what it's worth, I don't believe you're running a meth lab. But the secrecy, it's fueling the fire. If you could just be a little more transparent about what you're doing in that workshop of yours, it might go a long way to calming people's fears." I looked at this kind, reasonable man and felt a profound sense of frustration. My non-disclosure agreement was a steel wall. I couldn't tell him the truth. "Dr. Chen, I appreciate your concern," I said, my voice equally low. "I am a material scientist, working on a private research project. I can tell you, with absolute certainty, that it is perfectly safe and involves no hazardous materials whatsoever. The lab is a clean room, and the secrecy is a necessary part of the research process. I'm afraid that's all I can say." He studied my face for a long moment, his trained, diagnostic eyes searching for the truth. He seemed to sense that I was not lying, but that I was also not telling him the whole story. He nodded slowly. "All right, Dr. Thorne," he said. "I'll take you at your word, but you should know, you're fighting a losing battle in the court of public opinion." He walked away, leaving me more isolated than ever. Judith's strategy was brilliant in its simplicity. She had created a narrative so powerful that even the most reasonable people were being swayed. She had made my necessary secrecy look like guilt, and she had turned my sanctuary into a prison. Having successfully poisoned the well of public opinion and turned me into a neighborhood pariah, Judith escalated her campaign to its logical next step. She attempted to bring the full, overwhelming force of city and federal authorities down upon me. Her own HOA power was limited, so she sought to deputize a far more formidable army to her cause. The assault began on a Tuesday morning. I was in the lab, analyzing the results of a successful polymer synthesis, a moment of quiet, scientific triumph, when the silence was broken by the distant but unmistakable sound of approaching sirens. They grew louder, closer, until they were a deafening, heart-stopping shriek right outside my house. I raced to the small, shuttered observation window in my lab and peered through the slats. My quiet, peaceful cul-de-sac looked like a disaster zone. A massive fire engine was parked in front of my driveway, its lights flashing. Behind it was a large, white van, with County Hazmat Unit emblazoned on the side. And parked behind that was a dark green sedan, with the official seal of the Environmental Protection Agency on its door. Judith had not just called one agency, she had called them all. She had clearly concocted a story of such terrifying proportions, a story of unregulated chemical storage, illegal dumping of toxic waste, an imminent threat to public safety, that it had triggered a multi-agency emergency response. My training kicked in. The project had a protocol for this exact, if unlikely, scenario. Protocol 12, Unwarranted Civilian Agency Intervention. My heart was pounding, but my mind was clear. I initiated a soft lockdown of the lab, securing all proprietary materials and activating the internal data destruct sequence, which would wipe all computers if the lab's physical integrity was breached. Then, I walked upstairs and opened my front door. A fire captain, an EPA agent in a severe-looking suit, and two hazmat technicians in full gear were standing on my lawn. Judith was there too, standing at a safe distance, her arms crossed, a look of grim, vindicated satisfaction on her face. The fire captain, a tall, no-nonsense man, took the lead. "Sir, are you Dr. Elias Thorne?" "I am," I said calmly. "We have received a credible report of a significant public health hazard at this location," he said, his voice firm. "Specifically, the unregulated storage of hazardous chemicals and the illegal venting of toxic fumes. We are required by law to perform a full inspection of the premises, including your basement." This was the critical moment. I could not, under any circumstances, allow them into the lab, but I could not legally refuse them entry. Protocol 12 was clear. "Captain," I said, my voice steady, "I understand your concern, and you must do your duty. However, I can assure you that your information is incorrect. There are no hazardous materials on this property. My basement contains a private research workshop that is engaged in sensitive, proprietary work." "We'll be the judge of that, sir," the EPA agent interjected, stepping forward. "We have a warrant." "That will not be necessary," I said. I held up a single finger. "If you would just give me one moment." I pulled out my encrypted satellite phone, the one that looked like a brick from the 1990s, and dialed a single, pre-programmed number. It was answered on the first ring. "General Harding," I said. "It's Elias. We are at Protocol 12. I have the local fire captain and an EPA agent at my door. They are demanding access." "Put the captain on the line." The general's voice crackled, sharp and clear. I handed the phone to the fire captain. "It's for you," I said. The captain took the phone with a look of skeptical annoyance. "This is Captain Davis," he said into the receiver. He listened. His expression began to change. His back straightened. The color drained from his face. His eyes, wide with shock, darted from the phone to me, then back again. His responses became short, clipped, and profoundly respectful. "Yes, sir. No, sir. I was not aware of that, sir. I understand completely, sir. Yes. My apologies. Sir. It will not happen again. Sir. He handed the phone back to me as if it were a live grenade. He was pale and visibly shaken. He turned to the EPA agent and his own team. "Pack it up," he said, his voice a low, strained growl. "We're leaving. There's been a mistake. A very, very big mistake." He then turned to me, his expression a mixture of awe and terror. "Dr. Thorne," he said, his voice now laced with a level of respect that bordered on fear, "I offer you my most sincere apologies for this intrusion." Without another word, they packed up their gear and left. The sirens remained silent as the fire engine and the vans pulled away, leaving a stunned silence in their wake. The only person remaining was Judith. Her look of smug triumph had been replaced by one of utter, baffled fury. Her ultimate weapon had been turned away by a single, mysterious phone call. She stared at me, her eyes burning with a new, more dangerous kind of hatred, the hatred of a zealot whose holy crusade has just been declared a heresy by a higher, more powerful God she didn't even know existed. The failed raid by the hazmat unit and the EPA was a turning point. For me, it was a stark reminder of the immense, invisible power I had at my disposal. For Judith, it was a profound and infuriating humiliation. She had brought the full weight of the city's emergency services to my door, confident of her victory, only to see them retreat with their tails between their legs after a single, mysterious phone call. In her paranoid, conspiratorial mind, this was not proof of her error, but proof of a massive, high-level cover-up. She was no longer just fighting a difficult neighbor. She was fighting a shadowy conspiracy, and it made her reckless. Her final escalation was not a calculated move, but a desperate, unhinged act of passion. Having failed with every official channel, she decided to take the law into her own hands, twisting the HOA bylaws into a mandate for a private invasion. The confrontation happened on a Saturday morning. I was in my driveway, washing my car, trying to enjoy a moment of normal, suburban mundanity. I saw her marching down the street towards me, but this time she was not alone. Flanking her were her two loyal board members, a large, beefy man named Gary and a thin, nervous-looking woman named Carol. They moved with the grim, self-righteous purpose of a small-town posse. "Thorne!" Judith barked as she came to a stop at the end of my driveway. There were no pleasantries, no pretense. Her face was a mask of cold fury. "Judith," I said, turning off the hose, "what can I do for you?" "We are done with the warnings," she announced, her voice ringing with a shrill, theatrical authority. "We know you are hiding something in that basement. We know you have powerful friends who are helping you cover it up. But this is our community, and we have the right to protect it." She held up a copy of the HOA covenants, her finger jabbing at a specific paragraph. Bylaw 7. Section A gives the board the right to an emergency inspection of any property if there is a credible suspicion of a violation that poses a direct and imminent threat to the health and safety of the community. We, the board, have determined that your unregulated secret chemical lab is such a threat. My blood ran cold. She was trying to legally justify a home invasion. "Therefore," she continued, her voice rising, "we are exercising our right to an emergency inspection. Right now, you will let us into your basement, and we will see what you are hiding." I stood my ground. "Judith, you are not setting foot on my property, and you are certainly not entering my home. You have no legal authority to do so. The police, the fire department, and the EPA have all determined there is no threat here. You are acting on a baseless, paranoid fantasy. We are acting on our rights as the governing body of this community." She shrieked. Gary and Carol, looking increasingly uncomfortable, but bound by her authority, took a hesitant step forward. "We have the right to inspect. If you attempt to enter my home without my permission," I said, my voice low and cold, "I will consider it a criminal act, and I will defend my property accordingly. This is your final warning. Leave. Now." My refusal was the spark that ignited her fury. "He's obstructing us," she screamed, her face contorted with rage. "He's admitting his guilt. Gary, Carol, we are going in." What happened next was surreal. The three of them, a trio of middle-aged suburbanites, began to advance on me. They were actually going to try to physically push past me and force their way into my house, into my lab. It was a complete and total breakdown of reason, a descent into mob rule, all taking place on my perfectly manicured front lawn. "This is insane. Judith," I said, bracing myself as they approached. "This is our community," she screamed back. "We have the right to be safe." She lunged forward, her hand outstretched, aiming for the doorknob of the side door that led to the basement. I stepped in front of her, blocking her path. She pushed against me, her face inches from mine, her eyes wild with a zealot's fire. Gary and Carol hovered behind her, a mixture of fear and self-righteousness on their faces. The situation was about to escalate from a tense confrontation into a physical altercation. The sanctity of my home, and the security of a top-secret government project, was about to be breached by an HOA president who had lost her mind. The moment felt suspended in time. I stood on my own property, a physical barrier between my life's work and a trio of suburban zealots. The scent of car soap and freshly cut grass mixing with the acrid odor of their self-righteous fury. Judith was pushing against me, her face contorted, screaming about her rights, about safety, about the toxins she imagined were poisoning her perfect world. A few neighbors, drawn by the shouting, were beginning to peer out from behind their curtains. Their faces, a mixture of alarm and morbid curiosity. "He's obstructing us," Judith shrieked, turning to her nervous-looking accomplice. "Carol, call the police. Tell them he's hiding a meth lab, and he's assaulting board members." Carol fumbled for her phone, her hands shaking. This was it, the final, irreversible escalation. A false police report of a violent crime. But before her trembling fingers could dial the number, a new sound cut through the chaos. It was not a siren, but a deep, powerful rumble. The sound of heavy, high-performance engines approaching at speed. Two matte black, government-issue SUVs, the kind with tinted windows and an imposing, predatory stance, turned onto our quiet cul-de-sac and screeched to a halt at the curb, perfectly boxing in Judith's minivan. The doors of the SUVs opened in unison, and 4 men emerged. They were large, impeccably dressed in dark, conservative suits, with earpieces and the unmistakable, hyper-aware posture of federal agents. They moved with a silent, coordinated efficiency that was utterly alien to this world of potlucks and lawn maintenance schedules. From the passenger seat of the lead vehicle, another figure emerged. He was a man in his late 60s, ramrod straight, his face a roadmap of command decisions. He was wearing the full dress uniform of a 4-star general of the United States Army. The rows of ribbons on his chest, a silent, intimidating testament to a lifetime of service and power. It was General Thomas Harding. The agents created a silent, immovable perimeter, calmly but firmly gesturing for the gawking neighbors to return to their homes. Their presence was so overwhelming, so out of context, that the neighborhood's mundane reality seemed to simply evaporate. General Harding strode onto my lawn, his polished boots making no sound on the soft grass. He walked past me, as if I weren't there. His eyes, cold and hard as granite, fixed on Judith Albright. She and her two cronies were frozen in place, their pathetic little power play instantly rendered absurd and insignificant. "Judith Albright," General Harding asked. His voice was not loud, but it had a gravelly, commanding resonance that seemed to vibrate in the air. She was completely stunned, her mouth agape. Yes," she stammered. "I am General Thomas Harding, United States Army, Department of Defense," he said, his voice flat and devoid of any emotion. "You and your associates are in the process of attempting to illegally enter a classified United States Department of Defense research facility." He gestured with a single, gloved finger towards the unassuming side door to my basement. Behind that door is Project Chimera, a top-secret material science program vital to the future of this nation's security. Dr. Thorne is not merely a resident of your little community. He is the lead scientist and official custodian of this facility. His home is a designated, off-site government research annex, operating under my direct authority. He let the words hang in the air for a moment, the silence broken only by the chirping of a nearby bird. Judith's face, which had been flushed with rage, had collapsed into a mask of pale, slack-jawed horror. The color drained from it, leaving a pasty, sickly white. Gary and Carol looked as if they were about to be physically ill. The general then turned his head slightly, his gaze falling upon the agent nearest to him. "Agent Michaels," he said, his voice still terrifyingly calm. "Secure the area. Detain these 3 individuals for questioning. They have just, in my presence, attempted to commit a federal offense under Title 18, Section 1361 of the United States Code, the willful interference with and attempted destruction of government property. And that is the least of their problems." Judith let out a small, strangled gasp. She was no longer a big fish in a small pond. She was a minnow that had just tried to bite a great white shark, and the jaws were closing. The power dynamic hadn't just been flipped. It had been vaporized by a tactical strike of overwhelming, absolute authority. The resolution was not a negotiation. It was a quiet, efficient, and irreversible exercise in federal power. Judith, Gary, and Carol were not arrested in a public spectacle. They were invited, in a tone that made it clear it was not an invitation, into the back of the black SUVs. They were taken to a quiet, windowless room in a federal building downtown for a long, terrifying chat with a team of government lawyers and investigators from the Department of Defense. They were not charged with a crime, which would have required public proceedings and risked exposing the project. Instead, they were presented with a choice. They could either face prosecution under a host of federal statutes, including the Espionage Act, for attempting to access a classified facility that would land them in a federal prison for decades, or they could sign a series of draconian, ironclad, lifetime non-disclosure agreements. The NDAs not only forbade them from ever speaking about what they had seen or been told, but also from ever holding a position of authority in any community or civic organization ever again. They were also required to immediately resign from the HOA board and sell their homes and move out of the community within 90 days. They all signed without hesitation. General Harding, true to his word, did not leave the community to its own devices. 2 days later, he personally attended a special, mandatory community meeting in the clubhouse. He was flanked by 2 of his stoic agents, in heavily redacted, carefully chosen terms. He informed the stunned residents of Maple Creek Preserve that my home was a sanctioned private research annex, performing vital work for the United States government. He explained that any future complaints, interference, or harassment directed at me or my property would be considered a matter of national security and would be dealt with swiftly and with extreme prejudice by the appropriate federal authorities. The message was clear: leave Dr. Thorne alone, or face the consequences. The HOA board was forcibly dissolved by a federal injunction, a legal maneuver so far outside the normal realm of suburban life that it became an instant local legend. A new, interim board was appointed by a federal magistrate, with the primary task of unwinding the hostile and restrictive covenants Judith had put in place. Judith Albright was completely broken by the experience. Stripped of her power, publicly humiliated, and living under the constant, terrifying threat of federal prosecution should she ever speak a word out of line. She became a ghost in her own home. She sold her house in a week, taking the first lowball offer she received, and disappeared without a word to anyone. The community, now aware that they lived next to something of profound, if mysterious, national importance, became fiercely protective of my privacy. The suspicion and fear were replaced by a kind of quiet, respectful awe. My sanctuary was now guarded not just by my own secrecy, but by the watchful eye of my entire neighborhood. The final scene of my long war was one of absolute peace. A few months later, General Harding visited me in my lab. He was out of uniform, dressed in a simple polo shirt, looking more like a friendly grandfather than a four-star general. He peered into the main bioreactor, where the latest batch of the chimera polymer was glowing with a soft, ethereal green light. "It's beautiful, Elias," he said, his voice soft with wonder. "Truly beautiful." "We're almost there, Thomas," I said, a sense of profound contentment washing over me. "Just need a little more time, and a little more peace and quiet." He clapped me on the shoulder, a warm, friendly gesture. "Son," he said with a rare smile, "I think it's safe to say you're going to have all the peace and quiet you could possibly want." And he was right. I had finally found my sanctuary. A peace guaranteed not by quiet streets or manicured lawns, but by the silent, formidable authority of a nation grateful for my work.